Hello, I'm Jason Turvey, the middle-aged revolutionary, and joining me today, as always, is my friend and comrade Terry Eaton. Terry, how are you?
All right, Jason, how are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. You must be feeling quite rosy, given Man United's recent success,
Yeah.
storming up the Premier League table. My goodness, three. That
Marvelous.
bloke will end up having to cut his hair soon, won't he?
Yeah.
I would have thought, maybe,
Yeah, something like that.
something
But
like that. But we're not here to talk about football. Funny enough,
no,
perhaps another time and another place. But what
yeah.
we're talking about today is HMOs, homes in multiple occupancy. And this is following an article that I published on my website a few days ago on the subject. It's been a topic I've wanted to write about for some time, but what with my commitments to other things, I wasn't able to get round to it. But I found a clear couple of days in my schedule last week, and I managed to write a brief article on houses in or homes in multiple occupancy.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. Thank you. And what I thought we'd do today is we'll talk about the article, talk about the rising phenomenon of the HMO, where they came from, and why they came along. So just to give you a brief outline of how we got to the point of what even an HMO was, and you know, as you just said before we started recording, Terry, HMO was not a phrase that was in common parlance that long ago. It's only a fairly recent phenomenon, but the
Yeah.
phenomenon of people living in uh, large houses or even medium-sized houses with a landlord splitting a house into smaller rooms is not new. It's been going since. It's not new. It's been going on for
Well,
many decades now. Many decades.
many decades. In fact, when I first left home and went to live in Portsmouth, the bed sit that we got was just an old Victorian three-story house split into rooms. So there was a room on the top floor, a room on the middle floor because you had the landing and stairs going up, and one on the bottom floor. So that was just a three. That was a three bed sits, if you like, me and my
Yeah,
mate. And so that was you could call three different sets of people, three different families. So that's what you would call HMO to the definition. It's just that we didn't call them that then; they were just
yeah.
called bed sits.
Exactly, exactly. And the in terms of defining what an HMO is, in simple terms, it's any dwelling that's been split up into separate rooms, like bedsits, like you said, but
Mm.
has shared amenities at some point. So by that, it means you might have a shared bathroom. You might
Yeah,
have a shared living space, like a living room. You might even have to share a kitchen. It's any one of those counts or
yeah,
will qualify a place as an HMO. So if you live in a self-contained unit which has its own bathroom, living space, and kitchen, you're not living in an HMO.
no,
Okay. And the reference I made in the article was to the classic 1970s television series Rising Damp,
yep.
because that is an HMO. The building
Mm.
that Rigsby ran with Alan and Philip and Miss Jones and all, that was a HMO as defined
Yeah,
by the 2004 Housing Act. And the 2004 Housing Act came into being, or came into force, sorry, in 2006, and it legally defined regulated homes in multiple occupancy, including licensing and management responsibilities for landlords. So there's been a rise in HMOs, I would say, in the last 10 years. A lot more HMOs, a lot more houses that would be normally considered just a one family house, possibly a three bed, are being converted into HMOs, and landlords are being actively encouraged to go into the lucrative world of HMOs.
mm.
Now, it's not actually as simple as saying, right, that's a three-bedroom house. I'm now saying that's an HMO. In order to make a
No,
house into a house or a home of multiple occupancy, you have to do certain things. So you have to install things like fire extinguishers, fire doors, blue spot notices or fire action notices, as they're called
yeah,
these days, basically telling you how to get out the building, where to assemble, and that sort of thing.
mm.
But if you can do that work, the returns are very lucrative. So, for instance, if you look at a house in my area, roughly the average price per month to rent a 3-bed semi around my area is something in the region of £1,200 a month.
Yeah, I read. Yeah, I read that.
And if you converted that into a HMO, keeping the same 3 rooms, you're likely to get something in the region of £1,800 a month. So that's like a 50% uplift on your rental income.
Yep.
Obviously, you'll have an initial outlay in making the place into an HMO with the safety features that you have to put in. You have to pay about £500 to the council to get it registered as an HMO, because you can't just call it an HMO. The council have to license it as one. But once you've got that initial cost out of the way, from a landlord's perspective, it's quite lucrative. And one of
Yeah.
the things, because I used obviously Google to do a little bit of research before we did this recording. I'll give you a quote. I'll give you a quote from Luke. This is what Google thinks about HMOs. It says there are 2 big benefits to letting a property as an HMO. Firstly, while HMOs will always be more time consuming than single let properties, the reality is that they still usually generate a higher profit. Secondly, a change in tenancy in a single let home often means you have a void period with no rent coming in.
Mm.
So those are the 2 things that Google's identified is why landlords should convert homes into HMO. So the second point's interesting because obviously if you rented out a 3-bed house and the family moved out, the house is empty until you can get new tenants. Whereas with an HMO, you've got a constant churn of people. And even if you lose one tenant for a short while, you still have substantial rental income coming
Still
in
got income. Yeah.
from the other rooms. But HMOs are not without their problems, and they're not without their drawbacks. So obviously, cramming lots of people into a relatively small dwelling can lead to problems with parking, antisocial behaviour, environmental issues, including damp. And it was only yesterday, and we're making this recording on the 28th of October. On the 27th of October, new laws came into effect governing the management of HMOs. And one of them is called AWAB's law, named after a very young boy, in fact, called Awab Ishak, who died in 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by black mold in his
Yes.
home in Rochdale. It was a heartbreaking story.
There's a lot of them about, isn't there?
There is a lot of them about.
Slums.
Well, yes. And these laws that came in yesterday, as we record, only applies to social landlords. So that means any home that's rented out by a landlord on behalf of the local council, and the local council pays the landlord the rent, they will be governed by this new law. But the 4.6 million people who privately rent will not be covered by this legislation. So if your house is mold ridden now, it will be forevermore unless you take action yourself with the landlord. So HMOs are a growing phenomenon. Websites all over the place are encouraging landlords to diversify their portfolios and convert some of their houses to HMOs, or if they buy new properties to convert those to HMOs.
Mm.
So what's your initial thoughts on this rising phenomenon of the HMO, Terry?
It's only rising really because it's always been there. As I said to you earlier, my son was a student in Preston, and they did all the residence the first year, and then and the second year, and then in his third year, or when he came back from his year off in America, he went with another lad into a HMO. Well, it wasn't called a HMO, but it was basically shared kitchen, bathroom. You had a bedroom. That's what it was. There was 3 guys in there, 3 bedrooms, and you shared. So it was just a house to let for students. And people were saying about my town about HMOs, and I said, "You're having a laugh. There's hardly any here in comparison to some places. And why are you concerned when generally it's students? So who are getting a grant if they're working class and they fall below the threshold. So there'll be the rent can be charged as high as it wants to be because they're going to be paid because they're going to get a grant or a loan. By the way, they have to pay it back. But there you go. But I think it's because of it's seen now as an excuse to have a go at immigrants because they're being put into HMOs. But they're not all being put into HMOs. I asked the question of, now you brought that point, I just want to raise this because it's relevant. I asked my mate Ray, who's been, we worked for the council for 30 years. So I asked him, hi Ray, do you have any information on where I could find out how many HMOs are in Cheshire West and Chester and the situation regarding houses being bought by the council and turned into HMOs? He said, oh, so on the council's research or planning departments, they might have some figures, but small HMOs don't need permission or a license, so may not be on any records. I
Mm.
don't get that. A freedom of information to the council might tell you how many places have HMO licenses, but the overwhelming majority will be student properties in Chester. And I doubt the council's bought any property to turn into a HMO. Asylum seeker houses are bought by Serco for the government. The council did buy some houses for refugees, half funded by the government, but I think these would have been for families from Ukraine and Afghanistan. That's all the information he gave me. But basically, he's right. But it's just that a mate of mine, well, a mate of my brother's actually, he's recently had a divorce and he sold his house and he's bought a house lesser value. It's not far from me. Um, but he sold his and he sold it within 6 weeks. The council bought it. It's a 3 bedroomed house. So I said to him, he said, well, I'm not bothered. They paid they paid the asking price. There was no haggling. And I've got sold my house and I'm moving into another one. So I thought, well, I wonder why. So I asked Ray, and Ray says, oh, and then I looked it up. And councils do hold housing stock of other houses other than previously council houses. So they do buy houses to supplement their housing stock. But I don't know who they would who would go in them. Would it be just be ordinary council tenants? I don't know.
Mm.
But there's been kick-offs about another house on another estate in the town that's been sold and is converting to a HMO, and all the neighbours are kicking off. And this is the reason because they don't use there's no university in our town, so it's not going to be students. So it's got to be refugees, and that's what they're kicking off for. But I don't know why.
Mm.
I don't get that. If if they were illegal immigrants, they wouldn't be given a HMO. Surely, would they?
No, no, no. The odds are
No. So these
they'd be
people are refugees.
the odds are if they were asylum seekers being processed, they would be probably put in a hotel. I would have
Yeah.
thought.
So
Um,
so if people who go into HMO now um, are all immigrants, then surely they must be legal. They can't surely house illegal immigrants. The council can't just house. I mean, I don't know, Jason. You probably know better than me, but it just seems odd to me that people are kicking off about HMOs when they don't even know who's living in them,
no, well, I mean, obviously
unless they exist, obviously.
the the question of HMOs is a testy one for the neighbourhoods that they end up in because obviously you're taking regular 3 bedroom housing stock. Let's call it an average 3 bed family house. And as I said in the article, one of the first things that landlords are doing is not just doing the conversion of that house into a HMO. They'll extend it. They'll extend the house comically
Yes,
into the back garden, which is the
yes,
only
they
real
have.
free space that they've got. Add either more bedrooms or make the existing bedrooms bigger, then do all the other stuff that they have to do with the fire action notices and the doors and the fire extinguishers and so on. And then rent whatever rooms are left in that house after they've done the conversion, 3, maybe 4, maybe even 5, rent them out to local tenants. I mean, the idea, I'm not saying that it's impossible that immigrants couldn't be living in this HMO, but the odds are it could just as easily be anyone else because with the depression of wages that people are suffering, with the cost of living crisis that people are suffering and continue to suffer. Inflation is still remaining stubbornly at just shy of 4%, and with the average price of a rented room or a rented house, sorry, or even a rented flat going up all the time,
Mm.
HMOs are becoming a very tempting proposition for people. You know, if they want to, if they want to either leave their parents home and break out on their own, or they find themselves through break up a relationship or divorce or something like that and needing somewhere to live, um, uh, not necessarily in the short term, but just find somewhere to live that's affordable. HMOs, from a tenant's point of view, are quite tempting. You know, as I said in the article, the average price of a one bed flat in London means you have to earn £30,000 a year just to cover the rent and the bills.
Yeah, yeah,
That's before you put a shirt on your back or food in your belly. And with when you pay, when you haven't earned that sort of money to just keep a roof over your head and live in a flat, like most people at some point in their lives have done, then you can see why people are being driven towards HMOs. It's because the wages that they earn don't cover rent.
yeah. It doesn't equate, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, no. And like I said, I think part of the problem, and something I've pointed to in the article, is that it's this deliberate constriction of housing supply that is leading to this issue. I mean, you said yourself that you're selling a 3 bedroom house within 6 weeks. Houses are, I know house sales are slowing down in certain parts of the country, but in other parts of the country, houses are still being put up for sale and sold within weeks,
Yeah.
because there is a growing phenomenon of landlords converting these places into HMOs and
Mm.
then making very, very lucrative returns from rent from these buildings.
Mm.
So um, of course the problem is that, and this may be what was concerning those people near you. You get three, four, possibly five people living in one house. It's possible that they might all have a car, which can
Yeah.
lead to rows with the neighbours over parking.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Depending on the people that they place in them, they might come from different backgrounds, but there might be issues with antisocial behaviour. God only
Yeah.
knows, if you squish five adults into a house, there's going to be antisocial behaviour at some point when they all start
Mm.
falling out with each other.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's also problems, like we've said before, with mold, with condensation that builds up, which is characterized in overcrowded houses.
Yeah.
There's also problems with five people creating five people's worth of rubbish, where how many bins that house has got, and so on. So every time a HMO is introduced into a street, it's a little pull down on the services. It's a little bit of a drag on the services, the parking, the environment, and everything else.
Mm.
And uh, like your friend alluded to, the rules on HMOs are quite loose and fast, and are often being changed. I mean, there was two London boroughs, Wandsworth, and the other Brent, who are having to introduce new rules to manage HMOs. There's growth
Mm.
areas in England, the northeast of England, London, and West Midlands are all seeing an explosion in HMOs.
Mm.
Um, Again, because of the downward pressure on wages, the constriction of housing supply, and the cost of living crisis. I mean, that's basically the,
Yeah.
the, the things that are involved in creating this phenomenon. But it sounds like the councils are chasing their tails somewhat, and they're some way along the curve in trying to address all these problems, because they're all. I actually mentioned Medway Council in Kent considering new licensing rules for HMOs in my article. 22% of shared amenity HMOs in Medway had at least one serious hazard, which can include mould, fire safety, or electrical problems. So it would appear that there are a number of landlords who are throwing caution to the wind somewhat in these conversions, and they're not necessarily doing things like upgrading the electric system or sorting out damp and things like that, are they?
That's the point. when the government recently changed the law to allow landlords to evict existing tenants in houses um, for no reason, but there was a cut-off date on it, and they could come. Whereas once this act's in now, a tenant can't just be evicted unless they don't pay the rent or they wreck the house or something. If they pay the rent on time and all, they can't be evicted for no reason, just because the landlord wants to change it to an HMO. And
Mhm.
this is the insidious point with this government, because that law came in, and all of a sudden HMOs sprung up because landlords are thinking, hang on, if I don't take advantage of this, I'll never get rid of this tenant. I'll never be able to convert it to anything other than what it is. And then if you whack the rent up exorbitantly, there'll be someone in an area who says this rent is too much for this area. Like you couldn't ask 1,200 quid for a flat here as you would in London. It just wouldn't happen. Do you know what I mean?
No.
So, and that's why I think a lot of this is coming in with some landlords unscrupulously decided, right, well, I'm evicting these because there's somebody lives not far from us, um, had a small child. They ended up in a hotel in Chester for a period of time, and then they moved them to a respite because only can be in these places for so long, apparently. Fortunately, now the council have housed them in well, it's affordable accommodation, but obviously uh, the girl's working a few days a week and supplemented with universal credit. But they are actually houses built for the council, not to sell privately, if you like. So which it's a nice little house, which was quite a good thing. I've seen them up there, new estate, not far from me, and so she's one of the lucky ones. But she could have been shoved from pillar to post from one hotel to another, or one respite care home with drug addicts and all kinds of other problematic people. Um, you know, not through their fault maybe, but it doesn't matter if you've got a young child, you don't want that sort of thing. Um, and and that's where I think it may have come up from. People have put two and two together and made five, and allied it with mass increase in immigration, mass increase in HMOs, and they've put the two together. And I would imagine that in Chester, the HMOs probably are all students because it is accommodate. It's a university city, so they've got to have places for students to go. They're not going to travel every day from wherever. But that's what I see. The use for them. And so be it. If everyone's got to live, Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
it's. But it's just, it grates with me when you think the landlords are just unscrupulously exploiting people who are worse off in life than, say, the average. Well, say me and you, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
They
Exactly.
fell on bad times and they're being exploited.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's not
And
right.
exploitation and parasitism is part of this problem, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
as we mentioned earlier about asylum seekers and immigrants being put in hotels whilst they're being cleared, whatever clearing means, but they're being put in hotels by hotel owners who simply want to ramp up the price per room as opposed to what you or I would pay to stay in one of these hotels per
Yeah.
night. They will treble it because the government are paying for it.
Correct.
And it's easy
Another
money for them. Now, again,
exploitation.
this is not a new phenomenon. There's there was a documentary some time ago. It was Ross Kemp, and he went to Clacton in Essex, which is now Nigel Farage's
Yeah,
constituency as MP,
it
and he
is.
looked at the guest houses up there, and there were guest houses in Clacton. Obviously, with the fall away of people having holidays at the seaside, these guest houses were looking for tenants any way they could come. And as it was, they were coming from district councils further south within the county of Essex, where they were having issues with homing them. So they would move them out and home them in these guest houses in Clacton. And you've got couples living in one room,
Mm.
one hotel room. A hotel room is not somewhere, whether you're from England, whether you're an immigrant or whatever, you can't have a home in a hotel room for more than
No,
a little while. You know, more than a week possibly, and you'll be crawling
it's a
up the wall.
respite. It's a
Yeah,
respite. That's all it
yeah,
should be.
absolutely. And similarly, that same sort of parasitism has moved into the housing market now, hasn't it, in this country?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been that way for quite a long time, where private landlords were buying properties and then renting them out at exorbitant rents because they
Yeah.
knew that the people who rented them couldn't buy for whatever reason. What I make the point again, it's a downward pressure on wages that means that it's much harder for people to borrow the money that they need to buy a home. There's very little council housing stock these days, and there will continue
No.
to be very little council housing stock as long as we've got the system that we've got,
Mm.
which leaves people in with a couple of options. Basically, put your name on the council list and then wait decades and probably never get to the top so you get somewhere to live, or rent privately. And renting privately means that you will get skinned alive by a landlord who, coming back to the point you were making about landlords getting rid of tenants without just cause, you have what's called assured short hold tenancies. So you basically rent a place for a year and then your contract is renewed every year.
Mm.
That always gave the landlord the option at the end of the assured short hold tenancy to go, no, I don't want to renew. Off you go. And then what they could do is re-rent it out at a higher rate.
Yeah.
So there's options for landlords. In fact, it's fair to say, I think, that the the law has often sided more with the landlord than the tenant. I know tenants have got some legal protections,
And I'd agree with that.
but in terms of the extraction of profit, the law is all on the landlord side, and not very much on the tenant side. But yeah, we got a sort of uh, a number of factors that are causing this HMO phenomenon, and obviously it's higher rental yields for landlords because
Mm.
you get more rent if you split that house into bits and rent out the rooms separately.
Yeah.
Cost of living pressures. We've got housing demand, which we'll come to in a second, and something that Google was called portfolio diversification, which is
Obvious.
basically spread bets for spread bets. So
Yeah.
basically,
Spread your bets.
HMOs will always have occupants, even if one of your rooms is empty for a short while, and that will tide you over just in case other houses within your portfolio fall empty for whatever reason. But we'll look at housing demand now because the housing question is one that's been kicked around by political parties of various colours for some time now. They all claim to have an answer. They all claim that we'll build millions of council houses or millions of houses, right, let alone council houses, but nothing seems to happen. So, where do you see the future for the uh, British housing sector going forward? Where do you think we're going at the moment?
Those who have can have a house, and those who haven't can't. But they're building housing estates. There's a brand new housing estate not far from me. Um, God knows where the people are coming from that are buying the houses because there's hardly any work here. I think they must commute into either Manchester, Liverpool, Chester, you know, because there's certainly no work in Ellesmere Port now. The odd factory that used to be owned by Shell said, but all the big names have gone. So wages have it's the same everywhere. Wages have just stagnated, but rents have increased. And until a council comes along and says, we're actually going to build council houses for people on the council list, then it's never going to end. But this is what gets you. You get people who can go to auction and buy a house for 30,000, do it up, and use rent that out at 1,000 a week or whatever, 1,000 a month. I mean, it's ridiculous. It, and the annoying thing is, you'd say, well, it's a catch-22. My oldest son, he lives in a rented accommodation on his own now, but he pays a vast amount compared to what he would pay for mortgage for a terraced house, but he can't scrape a deposit together because he'd have to spend all his money of his wages to feed himself on putting the deposit together, and it's a vicious circle. You know, the only thing wrong with 100% mortgages, like when Thatcher said, everyone should have a right to a house. We'll have 100% mortgages, no deposits. You just go into your house. Everyone's going, oh, great. And then 6 months later, the mortgage rate went up, and people couldn't afford it. And the old cliche I used to say to people, well, you know, now when you go home and tell your spouse that you're going on strike Monday, they'll turn around and say to you, no, you're not. We've got a fucking house to pay for here.
Yeah.
That was another part of the master plan.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
unless they build reasonable, as they were in the 50s, reasonable 3 bedroom accommodation to house families, you're always going to have this problem in the inner cities or the suburbs, is where I live.
Yeah.
Always.
Always. And the um I think it's fair to say that the the problem for people at the at the bottom end of the system, the ones that actually need to find somewhere to live, are the least considered in
Yeah.
this situation, isn't it? It would be very, very easy to solve the housing crisis in this country. You just have to do a mass council house building program. It's very, very simple on its face because it is very simple to do. The reason why it isn't being done is because there are vested interests, including the government, including the banking sector,
Yeah.
and including the landlord sector as well to a degree, who have a vested interest in restricting the supply of houses because that continually has an upward pressure on house prices.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that's also essentially true, I think, is that one other cohort that has a vested interest in the restriction of supply of houses are people with houses, people who already own their home.
Mm.
You only have to see anytime there's a plan to build a new housing development somewhere, especially a particularly big one. There's always this mass uh, mobilisation of people in the area saying, no, 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 we don't want this housing development built here. We've got problems. They always use the excuse of infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the roads or the schools or things like that to support this. What they mean is I don't want it built here because it's going to have a downward pressure on the value of my home. That's basically what they're getting at. And all these parties are all working together, perhaps
Mm.
unwittingly, but they're all working together in order to stifle the building of new homes. And
Yeah.
that's creating this issue over houses in multiple occupancy, because you've got a landlord who's buying up a house, converting it in order to extract maximum profit, and he knows he can do it because he's got the demand. There's demand there. If he turns a 3 bed into a 5 bed house, he knows he can fill those 5 places in no time.
Yeah. That's
Um,
it.
and like you said, the added problem is that you've got people who would like to own their own property, would like to get on the ladder, so to speak, but because they are basically exhausting all their wages on keeping themselves standing still, basically buying
Yeah.
their food, buying their clothes, paying their rent, paying their bills, and so on, they've got nothing left to save with. Nothing, nothing at all.
That's it. Yeah.
And this is a phenomenon that I do not see as things stand with the system that we live in. It doesn't matter whether it's Reform, the Greens, Labour, the Tories, the Lib Dems, or whatever you want. They, unless they want to completely change the system, this is the way it's going to be for the
Yes.
foreseeable future. In fact, if anything, it's going to get worse. It's
Yeah.
going to get worse. As we said at the beginning, there's always been HMOs. They might not have been called HMOs, but there's always been this phenomenon. And like you said, the people that stayed in these sort of HMOs back in the day were people who weren't intended to stay for very long. Students, sometimes like
Yes.
travelling tradesmen, builders, sparks, plasterers, that sort of thing. Uh, but they were not necessarily deemed to be permanent places for someone to live.
No, you moved to work if you were a builder, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly,
You go and
exactly.
get a flat or a digs in the town that you where you're doing the building.
Yeah,
That's what everybody else I know did. And then
that's
once the
right.
building
Yeah,
finished in 8 months or something, you moved on to another town.
yeah,
You went somewhere
exactly.
else.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
And it's something.
that's what they're there for,
Yes,
not to house people for the rest of their fucking lives.
yeah. But unfortunately, that is with this continuous constriction of the housing supply, that's
Mm,
what these HMOs are going to be, aren't they? You
yeah.
might find people who will move perhaps from one HMO to another, but they'll always move from one HMO to another. They won't move from an HMO into a flat or into a house. They will basically spend most of their adult lives living in bedsits.
What a fucking horrible way to live.
And it's awful, isn't it? I mean, everyone has either done it themselves or knows someone who has lived in a bedsit for a short while. Help them get established to some degree, get themselves a little bit of independence, but sooner or later down the line, they manage to find themselves somewhere a bit better.
Mm,
Unfortunately, I don't see that for people nowadays. I think if unless you have a life changing sort of changing your circumstances,
mm.
people who are um, having to live in HMOs could be living in them
Yeah.
for years. May
But,
not be the same one, but they will find themselves living in HMOs
but I
for a long
know
time.
couples that are my age who bought houses in the 20s and they're all paid off now and they've never moved. They've stayed in the same house. And they bought them because they both saved up, put the money together for a deposit and blah, 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 blah. But what people forget, they say, well, why can't everyone do that? It's because the wages are shit now. When you've got
Yeah,
such a thing, and we've spoke about this before, and so I both know each other's views on it. When you've got a thing called the minimum wage, that you ain't going to go any further. It's not going to be much higher than that unless you're a specialist at something.
yeah,
So a minimum wage will not get you a £20,000 deposit on a house. Not a chance in hell.
no,
Only for how good you are at saving.
no,
You've got
no.
to eat.
The minimum wage won't get you a salary that allows you to rent a one-bedroom flat in London.
No,
It won't.
no, it wouldn't. And but no one's saying that. And yet, I heard a guy from the Labour Party. I can't think of his name offhand. He was on X, and he said tenants are doing well under Labour. And I thought, oh, that's very apt. Today I saw it. I'm doing a program on that. Can't remember his name, but I thought to myself, well, they're not. They're not doing very well because they're living in bloody hovels,
Yeah,
as you say, with damp and mould and these are something from the Rackman days. Jesus Christ, you're familiar with him, aren't you?
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah,
Rackman.
yeah.
But a lot of people aren't, you see, and
Mm,
they don't realise that these slum landlords own streets and holes in the roof and oh sod it, you're getting just pay your rent or
yeah,
get out.
yeah.
Going
Exactly.
back to that.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. We're going back to that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other phenomenon that seems to be growing quite exponentially is the conversion of buildings that were uh, purposed previously as care homes or purposed previously as guest houses. They are starting to be converted into HMOs as well. So there was one I remember seeing it was down in Devon. It was a 9 bedroom former guest house
Hmm.
that was for sale for £900,000. Now that's a lot of money, but it don't buy you a lot of house in London, for instance.
No.
But that was a potential 9 room HMO if the person had bought it. And the other thing to bear in mind, of course, care homes and guest houses, a lot of the conversion work that would qualify them as HMOs has already
Yes.
been done.
Already
They've
been
got
done.
self-closing doors,
Yep.
fire safety notices. Some might have fire extinguishers and things like that. So the amount of actual work you would need to do to get that over the line as an HMO is probably just the licensing bit. Just go to the council and say, "Can I make this an HMO?" And it is much more lucrative at the moment for someone who owns a care home to convert it into an HMO than it is to leave it as a care home. And that's despite the amount of money that people who are put in care homes have to pay to be there.
Yes.
When you're talking about sometimes what £1,000 a month, £1,000 a week in some cases, it depends on
Hmm.
the care home and the level of care that has to be given. But the fact that care homes and guest houses are now being converted into HMOs really speaks to the clear demand that there must be for these places.
Well, one of these houses that's converted in the town was a 3 bedroom. It's been converted, done something with the garage. Now, there is an activist guy. I don't know him, but he's very active on Facebook and all that. And he's found out by one information that the person who's bought this house is from London, from Croydon. And you think, are they trawling through the whole of the land to buy houses up in the north and turn them into HMOs just to make money?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. You found a place called Thornton Heath, Croydon.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I saw it on the paperwork. If it was genuine, I can't imagine it's
Mm.
not. It looked official from a freedom of information thing, perhaps. I don't know. But you think, Jesus Christ, what? How has this happened? And
Yeah.
just to buy a house, just say, with the sole intention of exploiting poor people.
Yes. Absolutely. And well, I mean, I think we've said it before on when we were talking about Paul Embry's book Despised, where you've got and this is a not a recent phenomenon. This has been the case for some time now. Private pension provision for workers collapsed many years ago. Final salary pension schemes closed down many years ago. They're now defined contribution schemes, not defined benefit schemes. The
Mm,
returns on contributions is much lower than it was when they were defined benefit schemes. But
mm,
because employers say that they are not affordable, which means we're not paying for them anymore,
yes.
they've been closed down. And what that's resulted in is some people um, finding themselves being pushed into the housing market in order to create a pension for themselves, in a manner of speaking.
Mm,
And one of the ways that you can do that is things like buying houses to let out as holiday lets. Obviously,
mm,
regular living accommodation you can rent out as a landlord. And now, with the development of the market even further, and with the lack of affordability in the market, HMOs. HMOs are
mm,
now the next new thing for landlords to get themselves into.
absolutely.
Um, and as we said, they come with their own problems. They come with issues of overcrowding, of mold, of antisocial behaviour, of parking issues, waste disposal issues, and all sorts.
Hmm.
But because the system is actually designed not to build houses unless it absolutely has to, and when it does build houses, it builds it on disused land with almost no additional amenities. So again, we've talked about this when we were talking about uh, uh, like the council estates in London and elsewhere, where in the 50s
Mm,
you would build an entire town. It
yes.
wouldn't be just some houses. You would have churches, community centres, shops, police stations, parks, everything.
Well,
Um,
that wouldn't be so bad if they did that with new estates,
no, I
because
don't think anyone would moan. No.
you can barely get a doctor's appointment in your own centre. And now they've built another housing estate. There's no more doctor surgeries been built. So what's going to happen there?
Yeah, exactly.
You got
And this
another
goes back
1,000
to
families wanting treatments.
You're right, and this goes back to what you were saying about the concerned residents when they see this HMO about the putting two to two together and sometimes making five.
Mm,
Is that the problems of you not being able to get a doctor's appointment, not being able to get a place for your kid at school, uh, potholes in your roads,
oh,
and all these other things are not necessarily down to the overcrowding that's in the areas because your
no.
services are being cut left, right, and centre, and they have been for years. That's the issue. You could ban immigration tomorrow, you could ban HMOs tomorrow. It'd still be really bad out there. It'd still be really bad. You'd
But it
still be
wouldn't fix
waiting
the
hours in
potholes in the
HMOs
road, would
and
it?
all that sort of thing.
It won't get me a doctor's appointment. Uh, they said um, we are getting rid of this 8 o'clock dash to get an appointment. Excuse me. This 8 o'clock dash only started with COVID. We ain't got COVID now. So why have we got this 8 o'clock dash? You just phoned up the doctors for an appointment, you got one. Because all the doctors were in the surgeries. But they're not, they're all at
Yeah,
home,
all at
phoning
home.
people up
Yeah,
on telephone conversations.
yeah, that's
So
right.
it's no different in any other surgery, I wouldn't imagine,
No, it
in the
isn't.
country.
No, no, it's not. No,
So
that's, it's
it's all seemed that every surgery in the land does it. Now, when they say, right, we're going to build an extra 2,000 houses, well, it isn't. There's probably about, it's hard to judge with a housing estate, there's probably 300. But there's 300 on that one estate, but there's 300 families that may have children that need care from time to time, to the same surgery that's inundated now. So the services will not improve as they even when they build more houses. If that's what you need, more houses for people. Then again, if they redid up the houses that were in all over the land, they'd probably put all the blooming um, homeless and everyone else in the house if they did them up
Absolutely, yeah.
properly. Just
Yep,
derelict lying empty.
yep. There's enough housing stock in this country to home every person
Yeah,
that's here. Um, the problem is that because houses have been allowed to become a tool of speculation, we have houses sit idle, we have houses being converted into HMOs, we have houses being rented out to people at eye-watering rates
yes,
in order for parasitic landlords to line their nests. And that is the system now that we have. And the idea that with capitalism this could be tweaked and reset back to the 1950s, perhaps, when there was a lot more council houses and a lot less privately owned homes, is folly. It's not going to happen. It's
no,
not. We're through the looking glass on this one now, and we've got to decide um, where we go now with this, because this HMO phenomenon is the latest extension of a housing crisis that has reached fever pitch. I don't know how much more you could subdivide a place now, so that you can get people to live in it.
I know, I
It's
know,
it, it's I mean it's I think it's beyond doubt now that the next generation of young people will have a world worse than the one that their parents inherited.
definitely,
Um, and unfortunately, we live in a society where uh,
yeah,
people like immigrants are blamed. We're told that there's still options within bourgeois
yeah,
politics. You can vote Reform or vote Green; they'll fix it. You know, but the
yeah,
truth is, whoever you vote for, be it Reform, Green, Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, whoever, it's still the same system. You're just
yes,
going into a
exactly.
different shop front.
Yep, we've said this all along. It's the system, not the party. No matter who you elect, the system is at fault. And whilst they can, Farage can talk and shout about stopping this and doing that, he won't do anything different other than what the ruling class want him to do.
Yeah,
So if the ruling class want him to build 100,000 more council houses, then he'll build them, or they'll find the money to build them. But until that happens, and it ain't going to happen, because that doesn't make him any money, we're just going to be in abject poverty for the rest of the foreseeable.
yeah, exactly. And of course, the other interesting phenomenon about the housing crisis in this country is that um, someone said this to me over the weekend. A comrade said this to me. Is that effectively what happens is when you buy a house and you get a mortgage, you effectively buy the house twice because
Mm,
you pay back the capital, but in the interest, the bank gets almost the value of the house as well.
mm.
So, as someone you have a house, but you paid two houses worth of money to get it,
Yes.
and this is the whole issue. I think with the housing market in Britain in 2025, it's predicated. I mean, let's be honest. Um, the economy in this country has been flatlining for basically 17 years. Since the 2008 crash, the economy of this country has been basically flatlined. The only asset bubble that has been able to be restored was the housing market. And
Mm,
the housing market, obviously, being much closer to people, makes people think that actually things are much better than they really are, because you look and you see the value of your home go up, or maybe you are able to sell your home, move somewhere else, or downsize and keep a lot of money left over. You'd be entitled to think, just on the face of that, well, yeah, the economy's quite good because I've got a few bob in the bank, or I've managed to downsize, or I managed to upgrade, or I managed to move out into the country into a bigger place, or whatever you did. But the problem is, it's the only bit of the economy that's actually reinflated as an asset bubble. Every other part of the economy is still in the doldrums. It's never recovered from 2008.
mm, mm.
And the I suppose the problem going forward is because the other bits of the economy are still flatlining, that have brought us to the point where we're at now. So you've got people who, in real terms, haven't had a substantial pay rise for in some
Well,
professions
yes,
30 years.
yeah,
30 years. Um, you've got a trade union movement that has completely withdrawn from private sector representation. They tend to focus on public sector representation. So, unite with bin workers. I know bus drivers generally work for private companies, but they're public sector adjacent. You've got Unison and its organisation in the NHS and so on, but they've abandoned the private sector, which is where
yeah.
millions of people still work. So you've got
And
people.
basically the higher wages were there, but now the higher wages have gone, and these factories have been sold off abroad, or they've brought companies from abroad in, and they've cut and slashed the wages. They're not interested. It was all right when it was a power struggle, and you've got you've got major companies, Vauxhall, Fords, Shell, all these kind of big major companies that paid made big mega wages that you could afford a house, you could afford to live, you could afford to go out every day and night if you wanted to. You could afford to go for meals at the weekend, have holidays, run cars. You can't do all that now because there is no, the wages have not. And anyone who says to me wages have kept up with inflation, that I'm a fucking Russian spy or something, they need they need fucking locking up, because you keeping told, well, why don't you? Oh, well, I've been told it for 50 years. Fuck off back to Russia. But it's not a case of that. It's wanting to improve your own country.
Of
We've
course.
said all this at different times, haven't we?
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the lowest I've seen in this country in my lifetime. I haven't seen it any lower for
Mm.
people. No, so much. Even for myself, I see the difference, but I'm not one wanting to go out every night, wanting to go on 3 or 4 holidays a year. Maybe when I was in my 20s, yeah. But I look at the young kids and couples now who are in the 20s, they don't want to get married. They don't want to have kids. They can't afford it. They don't want to, they're
Mm.
struggling to stay at home. And if they are a couple, they're saving up together for some time in the future when they might get a property. That's no way to,
No.
it isn't a way something to look forward to. It's just a dead end, miserable country
Yes, it
for
is.
for a
Yes.
lot of people.
For a lot of people, and actually, what you just said there about childlessness. One other growing phenomenon, and I mentioned it in the article, and it must be a contributor towards the demand for HMOs, is loneliness. We've got a phenomenon now. We've got a generation of young people who not only are not settling down, getting married, and having children, they're not even meeting people anymore. They're
Mm,
not even forming relationships with people anymore. And these are people who are growing into adults, going out into the world of work, striking out as best as they can
mm,
for themselves, and are alone.
yes,
And are finding themselves with all the phenomenon that we talk about, with the depression of wages, the high expenses of living, and the high cost of rent and so on, are finding themselves having to live alone in a bedsit.
yeah,
And it's quite. I mean, my first place when I first rented in, what was that, 1999, I managed to rent a two-bed end of terrace house on my wages. And then a little while later, I met my wife. But I don't think people can do that these days. I don't
no,
think people
no
could do,
chance.
no,
A
renting
lot
a
of the,
two-bed
I
terrace
mean,
house on their own.
the guy next door to me, he's a digger driver, and they've just had a baby, and she's saying the childcare, her wages pays for the childcare, so he can go to work, and he's thinking of actually going to Australia for a year working for this fly in fly out FIFO arrangements where they go do mining in the middle of Australia. They're on vast amounts of money, but it's like hard work. It's 12. It's like no different from when they used to have the oil rigs. When they used to have people
Yeah.
who went from refineries here and they went to work in Saudi or Iraq on massive money.
Mhm.
Um, it's all gone. So all those people now who are my age, who and the ones who did these jobs, who went abroad and earned the big bucks, they bought their houses outright and everything, and they've got the money in the bank. Their kids have all grown up, but their kids won't be getting the same as they did.
No.
So they'll be either helping them out or they'll have to stay at home.
Yeah, that's right.
They
Yeah.
don't want children. They're not interested.
No. And that's another phenomenon. I mean, I wrote an article for the Class Consciousness Project a while back called Dawn of the Dinks. Dual
Yeah.
income, no kids, which is a growing phenomenon. Um, and I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of people of a political persuasion who have misidentified the problems that cause childlessness. It's very easy to say, well, they can't afford to raise a family, but people people used to have more children in this country when they were poorer.
Yeah.
To link it to just simple affluence is a bit of a mistake, I think. I think what it is, I think back to I was born in 1973,
Mm.
so there'd been a big miners' strike the year before. There was a big builders' strike the year before.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of class struggle going on in the early 70s as well, and yet my parents decided to have me and then my three brothers. And my one of my brothers was born in 1976, so there had been another miners' strike, and there was a lot of class struggle going on then. But I think it's not particularly scientific, but I think people just felt that they could manage then. Whatever happened, they would find a way to get through it. They would manage. Whereas now, I think people don't think they can manage. If something big come along, like having a child or some other disaster, you lost your job,
Mm.
it could be the end. It could
Yeah.
be the end of you because, I was in Durham in July talking to people who were arriving at the miners' gala, and someone told me about their niece had found a job after looking for a year for a job. She'd spent a year looking for work and had finally got a job. Now, the problem with that, obviously, having to wait that long to find a job is bad enough in itself.
Yeah.
But would you do, if especially if you're a woman, would you do anything to possibly jeopardize your future employment, like having a child?
No, well, you wouldn't.
You know, would you, given that the job may not pay particularly good wages, would you have a child not necessarily knowing if that wage is enough to be without? As well, if you end up having a child and you drop out of the labour market for a while, and it's things like that that make me think that
But
it's obviously yeah. Sorry, go on, Terry.
a lot of times in the 70s, though, at my age group, um, people met up, they both worked, then they got married, and traditionally, when bought their house, um, both still working, then they have a child, the wife gives in work, the husband carries on working because his wages were good enough to withstand a cut of wages. Then, as the child got older, there wasn't all this exorbitant childcare facilities. You didn't go into school. Usually, a woman would not work for 5 years until maybe the child went to school. I went to school at 5 when I was a kid in the 50s. Now they're going there in nurseries at 2 and being looked after so the parents can go out to work to pay exorbitant fucking nursery fees.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
yeah,
But you felt that you could afford it. Everyone had plenty of money. I always think when they say, "Oh, go back to the 70s and the winters of discontent," and I said, "Well, that was the 80s, but and all that crap." Uh, I said everyone was happy, happier. I'm saying everyone was happy, but
mm,
and there was unemployment, but it didn't last for a year. You could
mm,
manage to get in, get a job, or there'd be somebody taking on, or factories. But generally, you got into a factory or a big factory, you stayed there forever.
yeah,
Like we said about Fords in Dagenham, you started off there as maybe an apprentice, and you retired at 65, and
yeah,
you spent all your life in that because it'd give you a good living. Same here with Vauxhalls, same here with the Shell, and all the big companies, the dock workers, all them, all gone.
yeah. That's right. Yeah,
There's jobs that work in warehouses packing boxes with raincoats in and shit like that. Minimum wage, or maybe just above minimum wage if you're working shift.
mm,
But It's all right for a single man. A married man has no good him coming home and saying to his wife, "Well, yeah, I've got £400 this week, and the rent's bloody 200
Mm.
or 100. Say 100. That's not unreasonable for a council rent. That's not if you've got a private. That's even if you haven't got a private house. So, nah, I don't know what the answer is, Jason. We could bang. I've thought and thought, and I know it's not the fault of lazy youth. It's definitely not that, and it's not the fault of immigrants. It's the fault of shit governments consistently for year after year after year, treating us like fools.
Yes, I think that's very fair to say. I mean the the in a system that was always going towards where we are now anyway, the turning point I think was right to buy. Right to buy was what transformed the housing market in this
Yes,
country from what it was into what it is today, and it's caused the rise of the HMO. But one of the things that, or there was a number of things, obviously, the right to buy was intended to do. It was obviously to privatise the housing stock. It
yeah,
was partly intended to encourage working class people to not think like working class people anymore. Whether you thought they was going to think like middle
yeah.
class people
We're
was
all middle
completely
class
different,
now.
but it was to trap the working class in debt as well. That was an important
Correct.
facet of it, trapping working class people in perpetuity in debt. Not only in terms of a mortgage, but also when you consistent. This is nothing to do with right to buy, but it was an additional thing that happened was when you suppress people's wages, as has been happening in this country for over 30 years. You have to fill the gap with something else, and if you fill that gap in your expenditure with credit. So
Mm,
people were getting credit cards out to pay for incidentals like things like, oh, I don't know, car servicing and things like that, um, little things that come along unexpectedly along the way. They were using a credit card and they were racking up more debt. So they owed money as unsecured debt as credit cards, but also secured debt uh, in their home.
mm,
And so what you've ended up with now is a system whereby you've got uh, a constriction of the housing supply because obviously right to buy also effectively prohibited councils from building new council housing stock. So they weren't
yeah,
selling the houses and then using the money to build more. They were told they had to legally ring fence that money and not spend it
yeah.
on creating new housing stock. And that was very deliberate. And so where we
Oh,
are now
definitely.
is an inevitable consequence of right to buy. Who knows where we would have been if we didn't have right to buy? But what I would say is this:
We'd have a
are
lot
you,
more council houses
one would hope so. Yeah,
and
one would
higher
hope so.
wages because people wouldn't have been frightened to go on strike because
Yes.
when you're in a council house, if you didn't get any strike pay generally, um, but you had a wife and child that the state paid for them and the state pays your rent.
Yes. That's
You
right.
didn't get any money as a striker, but at least you didn't lose your home.
No.
Whereas if you live in a private house and you're out of work for 3 months, I've got a, I don't know how these Birmingham bin men do it. Just continually be on strike for that. I understand what they're doing. Obviously, they want £8,000 a year wage cut, but they must have some balls
Mm.
to be out for that long and be able to manage to get by because that's
Yeah.
all they'll be doing.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
absolutely. I mean, that's perhaps we could do a special at some point in the near future about the Birmingham bin strike because it looks like that's been going on now, all out strike since March. They've just renewed their mandate for strike action. They did that in September, but there doesn't look like, as we sit here now, any sign of a resolution
Council
at
won't
all.
move.
And
And of course, while you've got Sharon Graham chanting on about the bin men, but at the same time saying they support Ukraine, well, I hold my hands
well,
up in the air and I'll give up.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
It,
the to go off topic ever so slightly on the Birmingham
yeah,
bin
I
strike.
know.
The
I'm sorry,
situation
but
you've got at the moment is very, very simple. You've got a council that's gone bankrupt that is being run by government-appointed commissioners. You've got the government are basically bankrolling the council to bring in agency workers to do the bare minimum waste collection that they can do to stop people rioting in the streets about it. And on the other side, you've got Unite, who are basically paying the wages of the striking workers, and no one's got a clue how to break it. No one's got a clue how to break the dispute. So this dispute could go on for another 6 months, and there'd
Yeah.
be no resolution.
Well, you won't be while you've got scabs working there doing mail.
Well,
Next
exactly.
thing you bring the army in.
Well, yeah. Well, that's been done before many times, hasn't
Yes.
it? You know,
Done with the
um,
firemen.
they're done with the farm with the green goddesses, didn't they? If we
Yes.
remember, that was a Labour government that did that. Lest we forget.
As we've said earlier in this show and before, it doesn't make any difference the shade of politics in that
Not at all.
parliament.
Not at all. No. But you said just now that there didn't seem to be any solution under this system, under capitalism. There isn't.
No, there isn't.
There is no solution. I don't think there's any capacity uh, within the system to redress this problem, and I don't think there's any political will amongst any of the major parties to fix it. Because it's all very well Zach Polanski banging on about building new houses and all this stuff. When he's bums in the seat, if he's ever prime minister, he'll find out to his cost that you can say a lot of things, but when you're actually in the firing line, when you're having to actually do it, you're not really given
Yeah,
very much scope.
words are cheap.
Absolutely. Especially if you're part of a constantly outvoted minority. You can say pretty much anything you like because it won't matter.
No, because you're never going to get elected to try, prove it false, for anyone to prove
Exactly.
you false. And
Exactly.
been the problem with the Labour Party for many a year, is they shout and bawl on the sidelines, and now they get elected. What have they done? They've shafted the working class with all these things that affect us: housing, wages, bin strikes, hospital appointments, everything. It's worse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why? Because they're incompetent. They don't want to be in power. To me, it just strikes me that they're frightened of power. They want to get out as soon as they can. If he could have a general election and get thrown out, I'm convinced that they would, Starmer, and give it back to the Tories.
Well, it's funny you should say it because effectively that's what the Tories did last year, wasn't it?
Yeah,
They sort of hit the panic button, called a quick election in July, called a quick election for July, I should say, knowing that they could basically try to. I suppose the best way to put it is do a bit of a damage limitation exercise. Hold the election, know they'll lose, but hopefully not lose as much as they would have lost if they'd left it until the end of the year, which was
yeah.
when they
Well,
could have held an election.
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
and and I'm afraid the Labour Party are in a similar position. I mean, they've come in, trying to. I mean, people like us didn't really fall for it, but they came into power promising change. They promised hope, and they've delivered absolutely nothing
No,
because
they've
again,
nothing. They've delivered absolutely nothing.
the system has got no capacity to deliver change anymore.
No,
While you've got a system that's completely parasitic with people drawing profit out at absolutely every point in the system that they can, there's no room in the system for change that will affect that continuing extraction of profit. And where there isn't the opportunity to extract profit, capitalism just ignores it. Like in this country, where people say, well, why don't we invest in things in this country? Why don't we invest in schemes that create jobs? Because there's no return in it.
no.
There's no return on investing in jobs in this country at all, which is why it would be easier for companies to build a factory in Vietnam to make shirts that are worn here than it is to make them here. Because it's
Well,
cheaper to do it over there and the
they
rates of
shut
return are higher.
they shut Grangemouth factory down. That guy owns Man United, or a part share owns Man United, Ineos. And yes, they can borrow money from our government to build a plant in Belgium. Now, if
Yes.
that's not a kick in the fucking teeth for workers in Britain, then what is, when they can do that? You've got that crank Ed Miliband running around the country waving his arms like the mad professor, going on about wind turbines and he really does my head in. He
Hmm.
talks nonsense, and he's a dangerous fucking man. Oh, I mean, you can wind people open the pits. Let's have some proper coal for making steel. Let's build some defenses if you want to build warships or whatever. It's jobs, good, well-paid jobs, trade unionized jobs. But it'll never happen. Not now they can import it from Poland or even China, cheap
Hmm.
steel. that that the steel that they use, you wouldn't imagine making a fucking tank out of that. Christ, you could fire a cap gun at it and put a hole in the side.
Well, I mean, even from a purely nuts and bolts, no pun intended, point of view, all virtually every rail that trains run on in this country is made from British steel.
Mm.
It always has been. I know they've experimented with steel from other places before, and it's backfired quite badly on them. But it's British steel that runs our railways, and it's from a purely practical point of view, it makes more sense to make things here. But of course, capitalism doesn't think from a
No,
practical,
no, no.
sensible
Yeah.
point of view. It thinks only about the profit. The profit motive is
Where do they
everything.
make the steel for rails?
Yeah, so Britain's rails are made in Scunthorpe, at the steel foundry there. So, again, it's a more sensible thing to do to make stuff in your own country.
Well, I would
If
have
it was
thought so.
sensible, we'd do it. We'd always have done it in this country, wouldn't we?
Well, yeah.
You know. Um, but no, as the system stands, there's very little hope for change. The
Correct.
only hope for change is not to change within the system. The whole system's got to be changed,
Yeah,
hasn't it, Barry?
yeah.
We've got to
That's
sweep
got to
away the
go.
system. The whole system's got to be got rid of. We need to introduce socialism to this country. And I don't mean Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana bloody socialism.
No,
It's not
it's more
socialism.
of the
That's
same.
social democracy. I'm talking about workers controlling and owning the means of production. And then we, as a working class, can build houses that we would like to live in, not that
Mm.
we are given to live in by a parasitic landlord class or by the foibles of the market. Proper, affordable, decent, well built,
Mm.
lasting homes for everybody.
Yes.
And until we get there, this system that we've got is going to continue to rot, it's going to continue to
Oh, yeah,
atrophy, and the housing system will go with it.
definitely.
Definitely. Well, Terry, I think I'll end it there. It's been a very good conversation, and I think we've pretty much capped this off quite well.
Mm.
Um, thank you for joining me. I'll
No
put
problem.
some links in the description, not only to the article on the Middle Age Revolutionary website, but some other things that we cover today. But for now, Terry, I'll say cheerio, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. See you next time, Jason. Look after yourself.
And you.
Bye.
See ya. Bye bye.